The world thought it understood the story. King Von's tragic death sent shockwaves through Chicago, the hip-hop community, and the music industry at large. Fans mourned, tributes poured in, and headlines captured the immediate tragedy. But according to Wallo267, that was only the tip of the iceberg. In a revelation that has stunned followers and insiders alike, Wallo claims that King Von's death was just the beginning, and that a much darker truth has been hidden from the public eye. This isn't simply a tale of street rivalry or the dangers of fame. Wallo267's account suggests layers of secrets, unseen forces, and complex networks that intersected with Von's life and ultimately shaped the events leading to his untimely death. For fans, this revelation raises difficult questions. What really happened behind the scenes? Who benefited from the chaos? And how much of the story has been deliberately concealed? The implications are enormous. Wallo267, known for being deeply connected to the streets and the Chicago rap scene, has never shied away from speaking uncomfortable truths. His latest revelations hint at betrayals, untold conflicts, and conversations that the public was never meant to hear. It's a story that forces us to confront the shadows behind fame, success, and loyalty in the streets. As the narrative unfolds, listeners and readers alike are left with a chilling realization. King Von's death may have been the public event, but the real story, filled with danger, deception, and a struggle for control, has only just begun to surface. The lines between street politics, music industry intrigue, and personal vendettas are blurred, leaving everyone asking the same question. What is the darker truth Wallo267 is revealing, and what does it mean for those still alive and watching? This is more than a story of loss. It's a deep dive into the hidden layers of power, revenge, and secrets that continue to ripple through Chicago and beyond, shaping lives and altering legacies in ways no one saw coming. The night King Von passed was a moment that sent shockwaves far beyond Chicago. Headlines flashed across social media and news outlets. Tributes poured in from fellow artists, and fans mourned the loss of a rising star whose storytelling and raw energy had captivated the streets and the charts alike. But while the public saw grief, shock, and tribute posts, those closest to Von knew the story was far more complicated. Among them, Wallo267, a figure deeply embedded in the same circles as Von, began to piece together a narrative that went far beyond the immediate tragedy. According to him, King Von's death was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a chain of events that revealed a darker, hidden side of street life, loyalty, and betrayal. From the start, Von's rise was a mixture of talent and controversy. He was celebrated for his lyrical prowess, his vivid storytelling that painted life in Chicago's most dangerous corners, but he also lived a life intertwined with the realities of street politics. That duality made him both a revered figure and a target. Wallo267 explains that while the public narrative focused on the physical confrontation that led to Von's death, it obscured the undercurrents of rivalry, jealousy, and strategic moves that had been developing for months. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted and loyalties were tested. And Von, despite his prominence, was not immune. On that fateful night, the official accounts emphasized a fight that escalated too quickly. Security footage, eyewitness reports, and police statements painted a chaotic scene. But Wallo267 insists that there was more at play than what was visible. In private conversations, he uncovered threads linking Von's death to previous tensions in the streets, conflicts that had been simmering and decisions that had been made long before the fatal encounter. The details suggest a mix of street politics, personal grudges, and even manipulation from people within Von's circle who had their own agendas. What the public saw as a tragic, random act was, according to Wallo, the culmination of these hidden tensions. Family and friends struggled with conflicting emotions in the aftermath. While grief was universal, questions began to circulate about the circumstances surrounding Von's death. Wallo267 claims that certain individuals were quick to distance themselves, while others actively worked to obscure facts. This selective silence, he argues, allowed misconceptions to thrive in public spaces. Fans filled online forums with theories, some baseless, some plausible, and social media amplified confusion. Wallo observed that while people debated the incident, the deeper truths, the alliances, the threats, the calculated moves remained buried. For Wallo267, telling the truth became a mission. He recognized that Von's story, as it was being told publicly, was incomplete. The streets, he knew, operate on codes of loyalty and secrecy, and speaking out could be dangerous. Yet, he believed that revealing the darker truths was necessary to honor Von's legacy fully. He began sharing insights, small but deliberate, to give context to the events that led to Von's death. Each revelation hinted at layers of manipulation, planning, and unresolved conflicts, forcing listeners to reconsider what they thought they knew about the night everything changed. The ripple effects of Von's death extended beyond grief and shock. Wallo267 notes that rivalries intensified, alliances shifted, and those who remained in the streets had to navigate an environment more volatile than ever. Young artists and associates who had once felt invincible suddenly confronted the fragility of life in the spotlight. Von's passing was a reminder that visibility and influence do not guarantee safety. Every move, every word, every association carries risk, and the consequences can be fatal. In telling his story, Wallo267 emphasizes the complexity of human relationships within these circles. Trust is fragile, and betrayal often comes from unexpected directions. Von's death, tragic as it was, also serves as a case study in how ambition, loyalty, and reputation collide in high-stakes environments. Those closest to him, including Wallo himself, were forced to navigate a maze of suspicion, grief, and strategy, learning lessons about survival that were as brutal as they were enlightening. This first chapter of the larger narrative reveals that King Von's death was not the final word. It was merely the opening act of a much larger story. Through Wallo267's eyes, the tragedy is understood not just as a personal loss, but as a cautionary tale about the hidden forces at work in the streets and the music industry. What seemed like a sudden, violent event was, in truth, the result of intricate dynamics, choices, and alliances that few outside Von's immediate circle could grasp. As fans and the public grappled with shock and grief, Wallo's revelations offered a different lens, one that acknowledged the chaos and emotion, but also exposed the strategic and often dangerous realities beneath the surface. This was a story about more than death. It was about power, loyalty, betrayal, and the consequences of living a life where every action has ramifications far beyond the individual. King Von's death, as Wallo would reveal, was only the beginning of a much darker, deeper truth. In the days following King Von's death, the city of Chicago and the hip-hop community were enveloped in a tense mixture of grief, speculation, and suspicion. While memorials and tributes dominated the public eye, Wallo267 was navigating a far more complicated reality behind the scenes. He had spent years immersed in the same neighborhoods, knowing the alliances, rivalries, and subtle power plays that outsiders could never see. For him, Von's death wasn't just a tragic loss. It was a symptom of a larger web of conflict, betrayal, and opportunity that had been building long before that fateful night. Wallo explains that tensions had been simmering for months, largely invisible to the public. These weren't simple arguments or petty disputes. They involved calculated moves between factions, loyalty tests, and strategic positioning within the streets and the music scene. Von, despite his rising fame, had found himself caught in the middle of these forces. People who were once allies could no longer be trusted implicitly, and even seemingly small decisions carried enormous consequences. According to Wallo, understanding the full picture requires seeing the patterns of influence and rivalry that extended far beyond a single altercation. One of the most startling elements Wallo revealed is how quickly perceptions and narratives can be manipulated. He described how certain individuals intentionally misrepresented events surrounding Von's death to protect themselves or gain leverage. Witness accounts, social media posts, and even some media coverage were influenced by people who stood to gain from shifting blame or controlling the story. In this environment, truth became a rare commodity, and the line between fact and fiction blurred rapidly. Wallo's role became one of piecing together fragments, discerning intent, and exposing the hidden layers of influence that most outsiders would never suspect existed. The dynamics of the streets, Wallo emphasizes, are relentless and unforgiving. Every interaction, every slight, and every perceived betrayal is magnified. Von's death, while shocking, triggered a cascade of consequences. Rival crews recalculated strategies, alliances shifted, and those who had survived past conflicts realized that the stakes were higher than ever. In this context, Wallo's revelations are not just about who acted or reacted. They are about understanding the forces that drive behavior in an environment where survival and reputation are intertwined. The risk of inaction or ignorance can be just as dangerous as the risk of confrontation. Family and close friends were also drawn into this vortex of tension. Wallo noted that while mourning was genuine, emotions were compounded by fear, suspicion, and the desire for answers. People who were supposed to protect or support Von had to navigate a complex terrain of conflicting loyalties. Wallo recounts moments when those closest to Von were unsure whom they could trust, highlighting the psychological toll that extended far beyond grief. The emotional burden of surviving and protecting oneself in the aftermath of such a public tragedy weighed heavily on everyone involved. Social media intensified the pressure on all sides. Fans dissected every video, every statement, every post, searching for clues about what happened and who was responsible. While this attention amplified public engagement, it also created a distorted reality. Narratives solidified quickly, sometimes in ways that contradicted the facts known to Wallo and others on the ground. The viral nature of speculation meant that misinformation could spread faster than any truth, and the individuals closest to the situation were often left to fight battles in both the streets and the digital realm simultaneously. Amid this chaos, Wallo267 emerged as a voice of context and clarity. He began to reveal pieces of the story that had been suppressed, from subtle betrayals to previously unknown conflicts that had played a role in shaping the events leading up to Von's death. His accounts were not just commentary. They were testimony to the intricate and often dangerous environment Von had navigated daily. Wallo highlighted that understanding Von's passing required examining both visible actions and hidden motives, emphasizing that the tragedy was as much about the structures and pressures surrounding him as the fatal moment itself. By this stage, it was evident that King Von's death was the starting point for a much broader narrative. The loss itself was heartbreaking, but the revelation of underlying truths painted a more complex picture of survival, loyalty, and ambition. Wallo's insight showed that even for someone as talented and prominent as Von, navigating the intersection of street dynamics and fame was fraught with peril. Every choice carried weight, every alliance carried risk, and every move could ripple outward with unforeseen consequences. This phase also illustrated the cyclical nature of street politics. Revenge, retribution, and power plays were not one-time occurrences. They were ongoing pressures that shaped behavior and decisions. Wallo warned that ignoring these dynamics or oversimplifying them as mere beef undermines the reality of how interconnected relationships, ambition, and danger truly are. The environment in which Von lived and thrived was unforgiving, and understanding the full impact of his death meant recognizing the depth and complexity of that reality. By the end of this stage, Wallo267 had begun to construct a more complete picture of the forces at play. The public narrative of King Von's death, focused on immediate violence and tragedy, was only part of the story. Beneath it lay a network of influence, betrayal, and calculated risk, all of which contributed to the events that unfolded. Wallo's revelations forced the streets, the music industry, and the public to confront uncomfortable truths. Von's death was not an isolated incident, and the consequences for those still navigating this world were just beginning to unfold. In revealing these details, Wallo positioned himself as both witness and storyteller, a conduit for understanding the hidden dimensions of a world most outsiders will never see. His perspective underscores a sobering reality. Tragedy in these circles rarely happens in isolation. It is woven from a complex web of relationships, ambitions, and rivalries, each thread capable of igniting consequences far beyond what anyone anticipates. King Von's death was the spark, but the fire was already spreading. As the investigation into King Von's death deepened, Wallo267 began to shed light on aspects of the story that had been largely invisible to the public. While headlines focused on the immediate altercation that claimed Von's life, Wallo explained that the circumstances surrounding his death were far more complex, influenced by a combination of pre-existing rivalries, hidden motives, and calculated actions. According to him, what happened that night was not a spontaneous act of violence, but the culmination of months of tension that had been building in the streets and within Von's own circle. Wallo emphasized that understanding Von's death required examining the underlying networks of influence. In the streets, relationships are rarely linear or simple. Alliances shift, loyalty is tested constantly, and past grudges linger beneath the surface. Von, despite his fame and talent, was enmeshed in this web, navigating rivalries that were both public and private. Wallo pointed out that while fans focused on visible events, tweets, posts, and social media speculation, much of the real pressure existed behind closed doors. Strategic moves, personal betrayals, and subtle threats were far more consequential than any single moment captured on video. One of the most critical revelations Wallo shared was how misdirection and misinformation played a significant role in shaping the public narrative. Those responsible for influencing perception knew that the media would amplify any story that fit a simple narrative: a tragic death, a random street fight, a single night gone wrong. Yet, according to Wallo, this oversimplification masked the calculated moves of individuals who had agendas tied to reputation, influence, and survival. Friends and rivals alike were careful to project one image publicly while maneuvering privately in ways that few outsiders could detect. The psychological toll on those close to Von was immense. Family, friends, and associates were forced to navigate grief while simultaneously assessing potential threats to themselves. In communities where survival often depends on knowing who can be trusted and who cannot, the stakes were extraordinarily high. Wallo described moments when those closest to Von had to make split-second decisions about who to align with, who to confront, and who to avoid entirely. The constant awareness of danger, paired with mourning, created an environment of heightened stress and vigilance. Social media, Wallo explained, acted as both magnifier and distortion. Clips of the incident were dissected frame by frame, rumors spread with incredible speed, and public debates often ignored nuance. While fans argued over who was right or wrong, the realities of street dynamics, loyalty, and calculated risk went largely unnoticed. Wallo's role became crucial. He was not only observing but also documenting and clarifying the deeper context, revealing the forces that shaped events both immediately before and after Von's death. Another layer Wallo highlighted was the cycle of retaliation and street politics. In the environment Von inhabited, actions rarely occurred in isolation. Every perceived slight or betrayal could ignite a series of responses, each with potentially deadly consequences. He explained that Von's death did not end with that night. It set off a chain reaction, forcing friends, associates, and rivals to reconsider strategies, alliances, and personal safety. Understanding this ripple effect is essential to grasping why Wallo considered Von's passing the beginning of a larger, darker story. Family and collaborators also faced immense pressure. While public focus was often on mourning and tributes, those on the inside had to make difficult decisions in real time. Who could be trusted to handle legal matters? Who could provide support without exposing others to danger? Wallo recounted instances where even well-intentioned allies hesitated, knowing that the complex mix of loyalty, ambition, and potential revenge made missteps costly. In this environment, grief could not exist in isolation. It was intertwined with survival and strategy. Wallo also pointed to the broader industry dynamics. Fame and visibility in the music world often bring added scrutiny. And for someone like Von, who was deeply connected to both the streets and the professional music scene, that scrutiny intensified every move he made. Record labels, managers, and industry insiders all had stakes in the outcome, creating a network of pressure points that amplified the dangers he faced. Wallo's revelations show that Von's story is as much about these intersecting pressures as it is about street conflicts. By this stage, Wallo's account made it clear that the narrative of Von's death was incomplete. It was not simply a tragic end, but a complex, multi-layered event with repercussions that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Each revelation underscored how intertwined loyalty, ambition, reputation, and survival truly are in Von's world. For those still active in these circles, his death served as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the precariousness of life when influence and danger coexist so closely. This third phase of the story paints King Von's death as the opening act in a larger drama, one that continues to unfold behind the scenes. Wallo267's insights illuminate the intricate networks, hidden motives, and calculated risks that the public rarely sees, offering a stark reminder. Tragedy is often just the visible part of a far more complex and dangerous reality. Von's passing, in this light, was not an endpoint but the first chapter in a story of power, betrayal, and consequences that continues to resonate through the streets, the music industry, and the lives of those who survived. As the weeks passed after King Von's tragic death, the reverberations of that night continued to ripple through Chicago, the music industry, and the streets that had shaped his rise. For many, the story had ended in mourning, memorials, and viral tributes. But for those like Wallo267, intimately connected to the scene and privy to its hidden currents, the reality was far more complex. Von's passing, while devastating in its immediate impact, was only the surface of a deeper, darker narrative, one filled with secrets, betrayals, and decisions that had been set in motion long before that fatal night. According to Wallo, one of the most overlooked elements in the aftermath of Von's death was the way alliances and loyalties shifted almost immediately. In communities where survival depends on knowing who can be trusted, Von's absence created both a power vacuum and a moment of extreme vulnerability. Friends and associates were forced to reconsider their positions, weighing allegiance to his memory against their own safety and ambitions. This delicate balance played out quietly in private, even as public narratives focused almost entirely on grief, speculation, and social media outrage. Wallo highlighted the role of manipulation and influence in shaping the public story. From carefully crafted social media posts to selective interviews and public statements, certain individuals worked to steer the narrative in ways that protected themselves or positioned them advantageously. The public saw only fragments of these dynamics, often interpreting them as minor disagreements or fan speculation. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far more calculated. Wallo's revelations suggest that some actors deliberately obscured truths about the events leading up to Von's death, creating a facade that concealed long-standing conflicts, grudges, and plans that had been set in motion months in advance. The psychological toll on those closest to Von was immense. Family, friends, and collaborators navigated a dual reality, profound grief intertwined with heightened vigilance. In Wallo's account, mourning could not exist independently of strategy, as those still connected to the streets had to anticipate threats, reassess alliances, and make decisions in real time. The stress of balancing grief with survival created a constant pressure that left no space for simple reflection or healing. In this environment, even minor missteps could have far-reaching consequences, emphasizing the stakes at play. Social media amplified the tension, creating a distortion of reality that was both pervasive and dangerous. Every clip, post, or rumor was dissected, shared, and reinterpreted, often detached from the facts that Wallo and others were uncovering privately. The viral nature of speculation intensified emotional pressure, making it harder for those involved to separate truth from public perception. Wallo's role became increasingly critical, not as a mediator, but as a witness and guide, helping others understand the unseen factors influencing behavior, decisions, and reactions in the wake of Von's death. A major theme that emerged in Wallo's revelations was the cyclical nature of street politics and conflict. Von's death, while singular in its immediate tragedy, sparked a series of cascading effects. Rivalries intensified, alliances shifted, and individuals who had once operated in the shadows found themselves forced into action. According to Wallo, this cycle is not linear but persistent, where the consequences of one event feed into the next, shaping relationships, decisions, and the balance of power within the community. The tragic loss of a leader like Von served as both a cautionary tale and a catalyst for further maneuvering. Within the music industry, Von's death also exposed vulnerabilities and pressures that are rarely discussed publicly. Fame and influence carry rewards, but they also attract scrutiny, manipulation, and strategic positioning. Record labels, managers, and industry insiders all had stakes in how Von's story unfolded. Wallo's insight underscores that the tragedy cannot be fully understood without considering the intersection of street politics and the music business, a space where influence, reputation, and survival are constantly negotiated. Throughout this period, Wallo emphasized the importance of context. To understand Von's death fully, one must look beyond the viral videos, headlines, and public speculation. It requires examining months of tension, strategic maneuvers, and complex human relationships that contributed to the outcome. Every decision, every alliance, and every perceived slight played a role in shaping the environment in which tragedy occurred. Von's passing was not an isolated event. It was the result of layers of history, power dynamics, and calculated choices. By the end of this fourth phase, the picture Wallo painted was clear. King Von's death was only the beginning of a story that continues to unfold in hidden ways. The grief, shock, and public mourning were just the visible surface of a deeper narrative about loyalty, ambition, and survival. The choices made in the aftermath, both publicly and privately, revealed a world where consequences are long-lasting, actions are scrutinized, and the intersection of fame, street life, and personal ambition is more perilous than outsiders can imagine. This chapter of the story solidified a chilling truth. Von's death did not mark the end of conflict or influence. It exposed the complex, often dangerous forces that continue to shape the lives of those connected to him. Wallo267's revelations highlight that understanding this reality requires attention to both the seen and unseen, the spoken and the hidden. The darkness that followed King Von's death is not just metaphorical. It is real, intricate, and ongoing, a reminder that the story of his life and legacy extends far beyond a single night, reaching into decisions, alliances, and truths that few have the courage or access to fully reveal. As the narrative surrounding King Von's death continued to unfold, Wallo267 began to reveal even deeper layers of the story, showing that the tragedy was not an endpoint but a catalyst for a series of events that would continue to impact lives, careers, and the balance of power in Chicago streets. By this stage, the public had largely absorbed the shock of Von's passing, yet few understood the complex realities that persisted behind the headlines. Wallo emphasized that what appeared to be random chaos was, in fact, the culmination of months, if not years, of planning, rivalries, and hidden motivations that had been quietly shaping the environment in which Von lived. Wallo's account underscores how Von's death intensified ongoing tensions. Rival factions within the streets recalibrated their strategies, alliances were tested, and loyalties were questioned. Those who had once relied on Von as a stabilizing force now faced uncertainty, and this vacuum led to heightened caution, suspicion, and in some cases, preemptive action. Wallo described how certain individuals, emboldened by the absence of Von's leadership, began maneuvering to consolidate influence, often creating friction with others who had previously been aligned. The streets, he explained, operate on a code where every move carries consequences, and Von's death reshaped the playing field dramatically. The psychological toll on Von's inner circle was profound. Friends, collaborators, and family members were forced to navigate grief while simultaneously assessing threats, planning safety measures, and maintaining appearances for public perception. Wallo highlighted that in environments like these, emotional reactions cannot be isolated from survival strategy. Mourning was constant but never private, and decisions had to be calculated even under immense stress. The stakes were not just emotional, they were life and death, with the potential to ripple across relationships and communities. Social media and the music industry amplified the intensity of the moment. Every post, clip, and comment was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Analysts, Fans and critics debated motives and actions in real time, often without access to the full context. Wallo noted that this amplification can distort reality, creating pressure that influences decisions and behaviors. The public may have believed they were observing a straightforward tragedy, but behind the scenes, strategic communications, coded messages, and careful silence were all being employed to control perception and protect assets, both personal and professional. Wallo's revelations also highlight the cyclical nature of conflict in the streets. One act of violence, perceived slight, or betrayal rarely exists in isolation. King Von's death sparked a cascade of consequences, forcing individuals and groups to re-evaluate strategies, assert control, or defend reputation. In this way, Von's passing became both a tragic loss and a catalyst for action that reshaped relationships, power structures, and street dynamics. What the public saw as a singular event was, in truth, the beginning of a ripple effect that would influence decisions for months to come. Industry dynamics compounded the situation. Von's prominence meant that his absence affected not just street networks, but also business partnerships, music collaborations, and public perception. Record labels, promoters, and managers, aware of both the financial and reputational stakes, had to respond carefully. Wallo explained that decisions made in these circles were as strategic as those made in the streets. The intersection of fame, influence, and mortality created an environment where every action, public statement, track release, or alliance carried layers of consequence. Wallo also addressed the human element of loyalty and betrayal. Trust in Von's world was complex, often conditional, and constantly tested. Even those closest to him had to navigate an intricate balance between allegiance, ambition, and self-preservation. Von's death exposed vulnerabilities and forced difficult reckonings. Some relationships fractured permanently, while others were strengthened through shared grief and mutual understanding. Wallo's account illustrates that survival and success in this environment demand both skill and awareness, as well as the ability to anticipate unseen pressures. By the end of this phase, Wallo's revelations made it clear that King Von's death was a pivot point, not a conclusion. The immediate loss was tragic, but the aftershocks, shifts in power, questions of loyalty, and hidden machinations were just as significant. Those who remained in Von's orbit were forced to operate under new realities, with heightened awareness of risk and responsibility. Wallo described this as a period of adjustment, strategy, and resilience, highlighting that understanding the story requires looking beyond the surface and considering the complex interplay of influence, ambition, and consequence. Ultimately, Wallo267 framed Von's passing as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the intricate realities of street life intertwined with professional ambition. The narrative is not simply about loss, fame, or tragedy. It is about how power, loyalty, and survival intersect in ways that are rarely visible to outsiders. Each revelation underscores that Von's death initiated a series of consequences that continue to unfold, shaping the lives of those connected to him and influencing the balance of power in the streets and the music industry alike. This final chapter emphasizes that the story is ongoing. While the public narrative focused on the shock of loss, Wallo's account reveals the complexity beneath the surface. King Von's death was the spark that illuminated hidden truths, set forces into motion, and revealed the stakes of navigating a world where influence and danger coexist. For those still alive and involved, the lessons are profound. Trust must be measured, decisions carry weight, and consequences extend far beyond the moment. Von's life and death, through Wallo's revelations, continue to resonate, both as a legacy and a warning in a world where darkness often lingers just out of sight. King Von's death was more than a tragic headline. It was the beginning of a story filled with secrets, rivalries, and consequences that continue to unfold. Wallo267's revelations give fans a rare glimpse behind the scenes, showing the complex web of loyalty, ambition, and danger that shaped Von's life and ultimately his passing. Understanding the full story challenges what we think we know about fame, street life, and the forces that influence both. Now, It's your turn to join the conversation. What do you think about Wallo267's revelations? Do they change how you view King Von's death or the dynamics of the Chicago rap scene? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your perspective and be part of the discussion everyone else is talking about. For more insider insights, hidden stories, and real narratives from the streets and the music world, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The deeper truths are just getting started.